All right, you just watched the video on Florence Nightingale and heard all of the amazing things she did. So, how did she convince those first generals that the things that she wanted, fresh air, good food, sterilizing equipment between patients, washing all of the sheets, making sure doctors wash their hands between patients, all those things that we take for granted nowadays as part of working in medicine, how did she convince these generals that this was the best way to do this? So here's how she did this. So this is a really famous graph. In fact, one of my professors in grad school, um, when she interviewed for a position at a banking firm, one of her interview questions, they pointed to this picture. The person had it on the wall in the conference room, and they said, "Explain this graph." Which she obviously could, and this is her field, but this is a very famous graph. So what this graph shows, these are both on the same exact scale. So they didn't shrink this one on the right. It's exactly the same size as the other, or it's built on the same scale, but it appears smaller because less people died. So both of these graphs represent the number of people that died in their army during the Crimean War. And they're each for a year. So this is April of 1854 to March of 1855, and then April of 1855 to March of 1856. Okay, the difference between these two is this is when she was able to implement all of her strategies and ideas to save more lives. So when we look at these, what we see is this blue represents the soldiers who died of disease. So they didn't die from their wounds outright, but their wounds became infected and they died, or they maybe got pneumonia or something like that. They got some sort of disease, and that secondary disease is what was the cause of death. The red is they died from their wounds. So maybe, they took a direct injury to the heart or something like that. So they died immediately. Or on the operating table as they were trying to save them. And then the black is other causes. So you'll notice that blue is really, really big. So a lot of people are dying of disease. You notice in the next year, after she implemented her strategies, the blue is still the biggest part of the graph, but compared to the red is actually quite a bit bigger, relatively speaking, and the blue itself is quite a bit smaller. So those things that she put in place really minimized the disease that those soldiers were exposed to and therefore prevented them from dying. Okay, so she was able to save a lot of lives, but she wasn't able to convince them of that until she had this graph and they could really see what was going on. So graphs are a really incredibly powerful tool to persuade people, to convince people, to affect change. But you have to use them responsibly. So we're going to look in the next videos about getting started making some graphs in Excel and how to use these to really have a positive impact.